Welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. This season is sponsored by Isophit. If you have not checked out Isophit and Brad Thorpe and all the amazing things that they're doing, especially in the world of isometric strength training, highly recommend you click the link below in the description or check them out on Instagram and see what they're up to. Today I'm joined by Brian Alsruhe from neversate.com. Brian is an amazing individual. He does so much great work in the online fitness space and online fitness community. And today, Brian and I are going to be discussing how fitness kind of evolves as you start to get older. So what fitness looks like once you're in your 30s, your 40s, and, just because the number on, your age goes up does not necessarily mean you have to lose intensity of your workouts. It might just mean some modification, and we talk about all of that in the episode today. So great episode. Brian is an amazing individual, and I highly recommend you check him out on Instagram, YouTube, and so on that way. Enjoy. Brian, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with you, or maybe they haven't seen all the incredible things you're doing on YouTube and Instagram, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the great stuff you do?
I guess I've been involved in lifting for about 30 years, been doing YouTube for about a decade now. Prior to that, I was doing counterterrorism for the government, got out of that, started a gym called Neversate Athletics, where I knew about coaching and stuff like that, but I didn't know much about running a gym or anything. So I just did it my own kind of separate way, and it took off. And next thing you know, we have world champions and all kinds of stuff. And I kind of got wrapped in this whirlwind of YouTube and everything else. And here I am now on the other side of it, actually in grad school for more like mental health and like the mental side of coaching and all that type of stuff. And yeah, it's been a ride, man.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I mean, it sounds like you just kind of went your own way and blazed a path forward, and it ended up working out, and you're able to help a lot of other people along the way. And I love how it's kind of come full circle for you from being the student to the quote unquote master and teacher back to the student now.
Absolutely. And that was a big deciding to go back to grad school is a big choice for anybody. It definitely later in life when you have to put some things on hold, and like it definitely was a big decision, but I'm so happy. I'm glad and glad that I'm doing it now. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And there's something to be said about the guy or the individual who just never stops learning and stays a student long term.
Sure.
And that's something I found, is really beneficial for the older adult population. Is there's a lot of individuals I work with from a PT standpoint in their 30s, some in their 40s, and they're still at the phase where I would call them athletic. But it's the kind of thing where we need to maybe like teach them new things or new ways, and we can't just do things the way we've always done for some individuals in some cases. Do you tend to see like an age limit to being an athlete or doing athletic things? I know you work with a lot of older individuals in that like middle stage of life yourself there.
I don't work with a ton of like older population. Like I would say
Right.
like 60 and above. I'd say most of my people are more like in the 30s, 40s, where like those changes start happening, right? Where you used to be able to just go into the gym and do whatever the heck you wanted, and you'd bounce back a day and a half later and you could deadlift 4 times a week and it wouldn't matter, like all those things, right? And then the older that you get, the smarter that you need to become about your training. You need to simplify it. You need to kind of really realize what you're getting the most bang for your buck, because you and I both know there's a huge difference between being busy and being productive. And there's a lot of people in the gym being very busy, but not really getting results and not doing those things. So, and as you get older, you can't get away with just doing stuff to do stuff, right? Like everything needs a purpose and a reason for why you're doing it. So I've really enjoyed kind of changing things up a little bit and helping those individuals out. And I really think anyone who's training for something is an athlete, right? Like not necessarily competition. And a lot of people in their 40s do still do competitions and master competitions. I just see the distinction between the person who goes in the gym kind of mindlessly, like, I'm going to do a little bit of this, I'm going to do a little bit of that or whatever, as opposed to the person who's actually got a program and they're watching what they eat and they're focused and they care about their training days when they're not training. They think about it, they review it, they go over stuff. I would call anybody like that an athlete because they truly are trying to get better in an athletic way. I think a lot of people who passed their prime in high school or in college, like as far as their athletic ability, even like defining them as athletes, as a 40-year-old, a 45-year-old, like, no, man, you're an athlete. You were training for something. Even if you're not competing, you are still absolutely training with a purpose, with focus, with intensity. I think that changes how they look at themselves. The same way that, like, if you tell a kid they're bad at math or you tell a kid they're good at math, like, you're going to get two different results, right? And I think just referring to people as like athletes and like, man, I've been an athlete for 20 years. And I've been like, well, you're training like an athlete, so I'm going to call you an athlete. And I think that alone kind of puts them in a different mindset about just how they go about their everyday training.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. There's certainly a lot of power in, believing you're an athlete and then doing athletic things. I think the term they use nowadays is like manifesting it or whatever. And I certainly think there's
Sure.
a lot of power in doing that. And I love your point too about, really if you're training with purpose, intensity, and goals, you're an athlete. There's not really an age
Yeah.
limit. There's not necessarily like, oh, you must play a team sport. I think a lot of people, when they
Right.
hear athlete, they think of team sports like football or lacrosse, and they don't think about all
Yeah.
the individual sports that exist. And
Yeah.
really, fitness itself is an individual sport, right? You are waging war against yourself and trying to better yourself and compete with yourself over and over and over again. And I mean, that's a lot of the fitness related sports. Like, you look at powerlifting, for example. Yes, you're competing against other individuals, but really you're also competing against yourself to improve over time. It's not just,
Sure.
winning your age division or bracket. It's also like, are you improving as an individual? So I love that take
Absolutely.
on, athleticism. And, to your point as well, I hate to be the one who says training needs to evolve as we get older. For a long time, I was, very against it, but I train very differently now at 26 than I did at 21. And I can only imagine how
Of
that's going to
course.
look when I hit like 30 or 40. I can't do things like I used to. I can't go in and
Right.
max my bench 3 days a week anymore, unfortunately.
And it has to. You have to get smarter, right? Or things start breaking. And I've experienced it. Things break on me. Then as you get older, it takes so much longer to recover from an injury. So like it's a much bigger deal to like tweak something when you're 45 than when you're 26, right? Like everything needs to evolve. It does. And when people say like age is just a number, like I used to when I was your age, I didn't start strongman until I was 34 years old, right? And had a great career in strongman. That doesn't mean that like when I hit 40, things didn't change drastically, or even like 43. But like when I was 25, I remember being 25 years old, I walked into my friend's. I had a six pack without trying to have a six pack my whole life, right? Like I ate pretty good and I trained hard, but like I was genetically, I had a six pack, right? And I remember walking in at like 25 to my friend and being like, lifting up my shirt and being like, when the heck did this happen? Like everything's changing. And from that point forward, I couldn't eat pizza all the time. I couldn't go to McDonald's all the time. You know what I mean? Like just the dumb habits that I had that I was getting away with, I was no longer able to. And then each year progressively, I've had to get more and more strict. I've just been like, well, I guess we can't get away with that anymore. I thought we could, but we can't, you know? I think when people say age is just a number, I think that's great. But there's a reason why there's not 60-year-old Olympians doing a sprint. There's a reason why, you know what I mean? Like hormones change, your body changes, stuff happens. You just need to adapt your training to it. Otherwise, your stuff's going to start breaking. Like it
Yeah,
just is.
you're definitely right about that. And to your point from a little bit ago about the mental side of things, I'd imagine that's something that's very difficult for people to come to terms to mentally, right? Like,
Yes.
when you're used to doing things this way for a long time, or like, when I was in college, we used to roll into the gym 2 3 hour arm farm session on Friday night and, crush your Five Guys burger and a shake to fuel the pump. And those were the days. And I can't do
Right.
those anymore. Like I'm
Right.
lucky to make it through an hour-long gym session. And it's like that is really difficult to come to terms to that you're not where you used to be from like a mental standpoint, anyways.
I totally agree. And I like when people say that old phrase, these are the good old days. you are in your good old days right now. Like right now, these are the good old days, because 10 years from now, you're gonna look back and be like, I can't believe that I could do that. Right. And like it literally, you're in your good old days. So take it for what it is. And if you can get away with doing the Five Guys burger and the shake, like you should be doing it. Like I think people should be living their lives at whatever stage they're at. You know what I mean? But man, to speak to your point about how mentally hard it is to be, because I can't say that I necessarily have. Like this past year, I ripped my bicep. My bicep is torn off, and I tore my rotator cuff. And I'm choosing not to get the surgery done. This is a distal tear, so it's only cosmetic anyway. But the rotator cuff, I've had this one repaired, and I'm choosing not to get it done because I'm not in pain. So as long as I'm not actively symptomatic, I'm not going to do much about it right now, because I don't have a strong heart for competing anymore. If I did, then maybe I would. But I can't say for sure if I've hit my last PR, right? Like, sure, I can hit like a variation of this or whatever, but like, have I lifted I probably benched my heaviest bench. My heaviest bench of all time is 505. And I'm like, that's awesome. But at 43 years old, I'm probably, and like with half an arm, I'm probably not going to get back there. And to mentally say that is so hard to like find motivation, get back in the gym, because literally for 30 years, it's been getting better, right? And getting those little endorphin pumps of like, wow, that's a 5-pound PR. It might be a baby PR, but it's PR. Or like, I got one more rep on that, or that went better, or whatever the case may be. Now that hump is kind of went over. And now I'm going, as it's slipping away, I'm going, what do I have left? What do I have left? And it's just a completely different game. And it becomes very unmotivating, at least for a person like me, because I've always been more about performance than the look, right? Because like, sure, I could get into bodybuilding and be like, oh, I'm trying to be as big as I can be or whatever I can be. But I know that I probably hit my last bench PR. And to go in and bench now, I'm like, what is the point? Is really what it feels like, you know? And so you need to find other reasons to train. You need to find other whys. I think finding some individuals to work with, I do a lot of coaching, so I always have plenty of people to work with. But if an individual has kind of reached a point where I'm at, where like, maybe I have hit my last PR, and maybe injury wasn't the reason for them to do that. Maybe they're like, you know what? I don't want to have that career-ending injury. I want to walk into my 60s still being healthy and stuff, and maybe they choose to kind of back things off so that they can not redline their body all the time. It's a really tough midlife crisis to go through when you've used your physical body as part of your identity for 30 years and no longer it is. And now you're like, wow, so what is do I start smoking meat, or like get a muscle car? Like what's my step? You know what I mean? And I'm not a materialistic guy at all. So those are my games. But yeah, like I went back to school because I was like, if I no longer am going to be able to set the example physically, then I need to be able to understand the mental game, because as my body declines, I want to be gaining another side that other people aren't. So I can be like, listen, young guy, I know you can still like crush this, but mentally I can get you to a different spot. Or like I can, all of us, right? Like the reason why we all struggle in the gym, if you're consistent and you work hard, you get results. Like you do, right? If you're hormonally in a good spot, really finding out why people can't do that. Why can't you get to the gym consistently? Why do you eat the bad food? Why do you binge at night? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? That's what I'm learning now. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's a completely different side of the game that I never realized, because I was always like, if you just push harder or you work harder or you whatever harder, then you're going to achieve. And that's cool, but it doesn't necessarily need to be banging your head against the wall to figure things out. Sometimes there are other paths, and I'm just trying to take that as a new way, you know?
You bring up so many amazing points, Brian. You know, to recap here, the first one being work smarter, not harder. And I struggle with that immensely. I really like to just put my head down and grind and do more and be more. And the more I do, the better I feel. But there comes a time, you know, regardless of how tough you think you are or how much you can handle, where you're eventually going to hit the wall. You used the term before, the phrase before, that you break instead of bend. And that's something that is also very difficult to come to terms to. Like, everyone has a limit. I don't care who you are or what you can do. There is a physical limit to what the body can do and take. It's probably higher than most people think it is. people
Just
can
about
probably
guaranteed.
push themselves a lot harder than they think they can, but there is a ceiling. There's a reason we don't go to the NFL combine and see guys running 3 flat on a 40.
Right.
Like
Right.
there is a limit to what the body can do. And that's very difficult to come to terms with, as you mentioned. And, it's also very difficult to realize, like, hey, there might be a limit for me hitting a PR on strength, or like, hey, I used to deadlift like, this much pounds for this many reps, and I can't do that anymore because of, past injury. Like maybe you injured your back, or maybe, in your case, a biceps rupture or a rotator cuff rupture. Like when things structurally break down and change, our function may change as a result of it. There are people
Right.
out there that I've met who are functioning really well despite structural anomalies, right? Like I have a guy that has a labrum tear, but he's still able to do 30 pull-ups. So there are
Right.
ways to work around it, but anytime you have structural loss, function can be impacted. And if you start to amplify that times years and years and years, right, that's just going to add up. And that's a very difficult conversation to have with people. And it's especially difficult from a PT standpoint because, you get young clinicians or even young strength coaches and trainers. We feel like we can do everything. We feel like we're invisible. Like, oh, you come in with 20 years of back pain, don't worry, we'll fix that. And then you get
Right.
like 5 sessions in and it's like, well, their back still hurts. So I almost feel like we need to like shift our conversation about progress away from the PR and more about like the performance level we're able to maintain as we age. Because to your point, the body will decline as we age, and that's just a statement of fact. Like our hormone levels when we're in our 40s are not the same as when they're in our 20s. The rotator cuff musculature in men anyways literally loses vascularity once we hit 40. Like we are literally losing blood flow to tendons. So
Right.
our body starts to break down. And as a result, I think our conversation about progress becomes not just about the 1 rep max PR or a rep max PR, and more about, other factors or other variables that we can assess, right? Like, we can look at performance beyond a 1 rep max.
And also like, I think at this point for me also is longevity, right? And being able to stay in the sport, because if you've lifted 30 years of your life, you're not going to stop lifting. It's literally part of every week, every day, whatever your thing is. Like you're not going to just throw it away, right? And at least I'm not. And so how long am I able to do this at like a decent enough level that I feel good, but don't hurt myself, right? Because I had a string there where I kept trying to keep up with my old young self and stuff just kept breaking. And I was like, okay, we can't keep doing this over and over and over again, And that's a hard talk with yourself. It really is.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. And, the other thing I want to bring into this too is I've noticed, when you're in college, life is fairly easy. Yeah, you might have a heavy course load or something like that, but life is fairly easy and you tend to have a lot of time on your hands. As you
Sure.
start to, progress through life, your time starts to get kind of taken up by other things. Maybe you're married, maybe you have kids or a dog, or your job changes and it's more demanding. Like life starts to impact things in ways that it didn't before. And I feel like that additional, either time crunch or stress can impact your training. So how do you go about accounting for, life changes for the clients you work with, as they start to get older, as they progress through life? How do you go about accounting for those things in your programming and training?
I would say for a lot of people, they've found success. And I'm talking whenever people's lives really start taking drastic changes and they get responsibilities, right? Like there's a lot of people who haven't had a real job. Like, sure, you have a job, but like the time's going to come when you get like that first career that like takes something from the other part of your life, And it's really hard to say this because if you would have asked me when I was 21 if I was busy, I'd have been like, yeah, I'm incredibly busy. You have no idea how busy I am. But looking back on, I wasn't busy at all. I would have said same thing when I was 40 at 30. And you know what I mean? You can always look back and be like, oh, it was so hard then. But like, again, you're in the good old days, right? Like you gotta smile because this is awesome where you're at right now. Almost everyone that I work with that like has a kid and now suddenly don't sleep anymore, right? For the next 3-4 years of their life, like their sleep and recovery is completely different than it's ever been. And then a lot of people have another kid on top of that, and it goes and so on. I find that a lot of people simplifying their training to, again, find out what actually they need to do versus like what everyone says they're supposed to do. Shortening the length, the duration of most people's programs, not programs, but their actually daily workout seems to work really well, because when you actually have other things to do, asking someone to take like an hour and a half, 2 hours out of their day to like change their clothes, get to the gym, work out, change their clothes, get back, then cook dinner for what, like that's a lot to ask the average person, especially someone who hasn't done this their whole life. If you turn to like someone who's like 45, has 3 kids and whatever, and you're like, you're going to take 2 hours out of every day, 4 days a week, whatever, that's not sustainable for them, right? But if you're like, hey man, could I get you to take 30 minutes out of your day, and instead of watching Netflix, you're just going to work really hard. It's going to suck, but it's only going to be 30 minutes of your day, and you get it done, and then you can move on. So shortening that duration and upping the frequency. Right now, a barrier for me, because barriers, all kinds of different people have barriers for why they don't get to the gym. Like I used in a recent video of mine, when I used to have a normal job where I went from, had to drive and commute to work, and then I'd have to go to the gym. I could not stop home between work and the gym, because if I stopped home, the responsibilities took over. I was like, oh, I have to do my laundry. I have to shovel the driveway. I have to do this, or I just get tired, or I sit down, or I watch TV, I get involved, right? Something comes up. So like I had to take that barrier away by in the morning, making sure that I had my gym bag packed with all the food, my shoes and everything, right? So that I went straight from work to the thing. Now, these days, a barrier for me is changing my clothes, right? Because it takes me almost as long to change my clothes and like do everything to get to the gym and get away from the gym as it does that I'm actually working out. So now I'm working out in my jeans. Like I do pretty much like landscaping, lumberjack, groundskeeping work all day long on my property. I have a big wooded property. And so I have to do stuff every single day. And then literally I just go in the gym with my work clothes on and I work out, and then I go back to work. And I'm being able to hit it more frequently. You have to learn what your barriers are and take them away. You know what I mean? Because the older you get, the more barriers are there, because you just have more responsibilities that sadly are more important than your bench press PR. You know what I mean? And that's just a shift that I think taking those things away. And I find that being able to have shorter duration workouts more frequently to kind of fit them in where you can fit them in has worked exponentially better for so many clients than like, no, we have to be rigid. You have to have this mindset. If you don't do this 4 times a week for 2 hours a week, you're never going to make progress. Like I've been that coach. I've been there. I've said those things. I've done those things. And now as like a more experienced, more mature guy who understands, I'm like, look, if you can't do that, that's fine. Let's find out what you can do. Let's get you doing something consistently. Let's get you doing something intensely for a short amount of time, often enough that it's going to make a difference. And that really has helped.
No, I love that. I love your point about the barriers. And as you mentioned, they change and evolve over time. And I think that's the importance of getting someone who's really great at coaching to help you with that, because, you know, what you always do or what you used to do might work for one barrier, one obstacle, and you might eventually find something that it doesn't work for. And having someone to help you with that, I think can certainly help you continue to make progress, stay consistent, and continue to move forward. So I love that point. Also on that point too, you know, I completely agree on the changing the frequency, the intensity, the duration, like all these different principles you learn when you're just kind of learning the basics of exercise, right? I think it was ACSM that coined like the whole FIT VP principle or whatever that way, like frequency, intensity, time, type, and volume and progression. Like, you know, it's very basic in nature, but it's like sometimes those basic things hold true. And it's like, hey, you know, if we used to go 6 days a week and we do this intensity for 90 minutes, why don't we shorten the duration a bit, maybe go 7 days a week? Like it is okay to train 7 days a week, but the intensity varies, right? Like there's some days
Right.
where I use like a high-low kind of model to my split, where there's a very high intense day and the next day is very low intense. And if you do that right
Yeah.
and don't hit the same muscle group 7 days a week, you can actually train 7 days a week And I feel really good about that. I like the consistency of like, I'm going to go every day. It's not going to be long.
Right.
It's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little less intense some days, but at least that part of my day is still a check and consistent, right? So, I love that point on varying and manipulating those kind of factors and variables to kind of fit the season of life you're in, for lack of a better way to put it. And I think that's an area where, a lot of individuals getting into fitness nowadays, they go to social media for advice or insight or, motivation. And in some ways, I think it's great, but in other ways, I think we forget social media is literally a highlight reel for all of us, myself included, right? Like, we never post the hard stuff or the bad workouts, or at least I don't, and I'm guilty of that. So it's very difficult if I'm trying to make changes and coming to a point where it's like, hey, I can't do what I used to do, right? To go online and then see all these people who maybe they're, enhanced by something or whatever that way, or literally their whole life is training, doing, all these crazy things that I'm like, well, I can't do that anymore, right?
Man, you bring up such a solid point. Like I literally, I kind of lost you there for a second because you said you don't post the bad things. And every once in a while, I'll post something bad. And I had a bad day yesterday in the gym. Like it didn't go well for a billion different reasons I can complain to you about, right? But it didn't go well. And I literally was so upset because I was like, man, now I don't have my thing to post to Instagram. And like that's my job, right? It's not like I'm like, believe me, if I could give up social media right now, I would give up social media, but it's my job right now. So I can't do that. You know what I mean? But like, I get upset because I don't have something cool to post on social media, or I'll post something that I think should have been cool that wasn't cool, and like whatever. And I let those things bother me. And I'm like, man, that's not the real path, right? Like the real path is the truth. That we're talking a lot. Like it sounds bad because we're talking a lot about what you're no longer able to do and what the past was. And I really want to stress the point that we're not dead, right? Like we're not giving up. We're not like the people who are like, no, age is just a number. I want to be inspired. I'm like, I'm being real with you. I'm being honest with you that things need to change. And you need to adapt them. Do not rip your bicep and your rotator cuff to find this out, right? Like cut a little bit shorter. There are opportunities. I tell people, even if you go to the gym for an hour and a half and you talk about your intensity, it was not an hour and a half intense session. That's physically not possible, right? There was a section of that workout where you were ramped up, you were doing your top sets, you were doing your thing, super focused, you were mentally there, and literally, like you and I both been there. If you get overamped for a set before your last set, before like a PR set, if you get overamped, sometimes you're not there for your last set. Like you overused it, like you blew your load, like it's out, right? And like there's an intensity that needs to come at every single workout. And maybe it's one set, maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes, whatever it is for whatever level you're at. But the important thing is that every single time that you step into the gym, you have some moments of intentionality and like emotional content in your lifting. Even like you said, if it's an easier day, a lighter day, there should be like extreme focus to your technique then. Like there should be something that you take away from every single training session where you're like, I got better today. I ingrained good reps instead of bad reps, or I hit a PR. It was ugly, but I got it. Like you should walk away from every single, you still need to challenge yourself every single day. Like getting old doesn't mean giving up. Getting old means like your finish line changes each day to fit the rest of your life, right? Because you can't be 25, 26 and be like, today is my day. I'm going for that big PR that I've worked 3 months for, and I don't care how ugly it gets. I'm going to go for it. When you're 55, you're not doing that anymore, right? If you are, you're looking for something different. Like that finish line needs change. But I just think it's so important to tell people this is not an excuse. Getting old is not an excuse to give up, to give in, to give up early, to like, you still need to push. It just might look different like you described.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about all of that. And I love the point about the finish line changing. And I love the point about, this does not mean give up. You have to keep fighting and you have to keep pushing. One of the moments that really stuck with me when I was in school for my doctorate there in physical therapy, we had clinical rotations. Everyone had to do them. I was in a nursing home at one point because that was one of the things you had to do. There was an individual in there, 49 years old, in a nursing home, can't take care of themselves. my parents were older than that person at the time, right? So here I am, my parents are older than this person, and I'm seeing a person younger than them in a nursing home who can't take care of themselves. And it just like baffled me. It's like, I don't know what I'm going to look like in my 40s, but I need to keep that longevity game in mind because I don't want to be in that situation. And I think a lot of people think like nursing home or inability to take care of themselves, and they think 80s or 90s. But meanwhile, there's 80-year-olds who run marathons. Maybe they're not at world record paces,
Absolutely,
but they're able to do it. And
right.
so it's like, what kind of person do you want to be later in life? And just because your training has to evolve doesn't mean you check out of the game entirely. You just might have to change the way you play the game. Tom Brady's another great example of this. The way he played football into his 40s at that high level of a quarterback, love or hate the guy, I don't care. It was really impressive to see what he did at the age he did. And there's other guys that are kind of defying the odds right now, but you look at the trends and the patterns amongst them, and they're very consistent. Their training evolves, right? And as it evolves, they're still able to do a lot of the things that they want to do, even despite injury, even despite setbacks. So I love that point. And, again, finish line might change. The method that you use might change, but that does not mean you stop running the race that you're on.
100%. I 100% agree with that. And the people who last the longest in these sports, you were talking about that. I thought about Randy Couture in MMA, and like that guy was like 44 fighting for world championships. And you're like, I'm 43 thinking like, wow, like I still feel in my head, I still feel like a stud, right? But like he was a stud at 44. The people who make it the furthest in these sports at that level, I mean, you're talking about such an insane level of like ability, are the people who are the most adaptable, and that they've changed their whole way and they've used wisdom to stay in the game as opposed to just brute force all the time. You know what I mean? And that's another thing that I think a lot of people, especially when they get in their 30s, 40s, 50s, if they could add into their training, would be just a lot more functionality training. Like I really like sandbags because they don't have handles. The way you pick up a sandbag is the same way you pick up like a heavy box of books. You don't pick up a heavy box of books like you do a deadlift, or you don't help a friend move a couch like you do a deadlift, right? Like it's a different type of strength and different type of movement. And even like doing drills, like I still am a huge fan of burpees, not doing them. I don't like doing burpees, but to get down on the ground and then get back up is one of the most important things you could possibly do as a human being as you get older. You know what I mean? So like even animal flows, like, and just doing basic body movement for like people, I think not necessarily doing like yoga or stretching, like static stretching or whatever. I'm not saying do anything like that, but get down on the ground, spend more time on the ground, play with your dog, play with your kid, play with your grandkid, do whatever, like get used to getting down on the ground and getting back up and just going through those processes of what it actually needs to do, because the older you get, it's incredible how objects in motion truly do stay in motion. You're willing to like continue to move your body through those ranges of motion, right? My mom has Parkinson's, and it's hard. It's really hard. But the Parkinson's training that she goes through is teaching her body how to continue to stretch out and continue to gain that range of motion, because everything as you get older, especially with Parkinson's and other things, start to bring everything in. And even as an older man now, I find I'm like, do I want to reach out? That hurts more than it used to when I was younger. Throwing a ball isn't the same game as it used to be when I was 14 years old. I think just moving your body through those huge ranges of motion, and especially getting down on the ground, because you look at the statistics about people falling, even in their 40s. Like people fall down and they're never the same again because they don't spend time on the ground, right? Compared to somebody who does jujitsu into their 40s and gets thrown around and is shooting takedowns and stuff, like you're able to do it if you use it, right? If you don't use it, you lose it. Like stay in motion. And I think for people doing something like a sandbag workout or club workout, mace workouts, getting down on the ground, picking up jujitsu, learning some basic yoga, just moving around in different ways than just I do bench press, I do deadlift, I do squat, like I think is a big game changer for people. And the earlier they start implementing it and just making it part of their groove, then the better off they're going to be the older they get.
I completely agree. The GPP, the ability to move in a lot of different planes and move well, and the ability to interact with the ground is completely underrated. And to your point too, like this is something I've been incorporating with much younger individuals lately. Like I'm talking like teenagers and 20-year-olds. We're literally doing like 5 to 10 minutes of GPP and just interacting with the ground.
Yeah.
You look at some of these different injuries that we see in younger individuals, like take the ACL tear, for example. ACL tear can be very debilitating. 1 in 3
Yeah.
people do not get back to where they were before, regardless of age, regardless of rehab. That stat even holds true in the NFL, where these guys
Wow.
have every resource you can imagine, right? So not
Sure.
everyone comes back from that injury. And we look at it, what happens? Either direct contact causing knee to move in a pattern we don't want, or majority of the time, we land in a weird position. It's non-contact. Our ability to interact with the ground was flawed for whatever reason, and we put a lot of force into a structure that was not ready to handle it. So my line of thinking lately, and I don't have like a research article out about it yet or anything like that, but the logic is if we improve our ability to interact with the ground and control our body in space, then maybe our ability to prevent those things or recover from those things will be better or we'll be more confident in it. And that doesn't change as we age, right? Like I have individuals who have torn their ACL in their 40s. Or, maybe I want that person who's 15 and tore their ACL to be moving and confident and active when they are in their 40s, because all
Yeah.
these different things play into the long haul, the big picture here, right? It all takes a little bit of a toll. So, keeping that longevity piece in mind, I love your point on, just interacting with the ground and well done GPP. To your point as well, older adults, regardless of your age, you can find a way to still lift heavy. It just
Yeah.
looks a little different, right? Like maybe instead of deadlifting from the floor, we're going to deadlift off of a rack and do a rack pull now. Is it the same?
Sure.
Maybe, maybe not. But if you feel better about it and you can still move the weight that you want to, I'm not going to tell you no. I'm also dabbling a little bit with some of the strongman stuff lately. And I am falling in love with the yoke carry because
Yeah.
plain and simple, you have a pretty low barrier here. If it doesn't feel right, you can just drop it and walk away. It's not like a
Yep.
bench where you might get pinned underneath it. And people can generally move hundreds of pounds pretty well and pretty safely. And not to mention that axial compression and axial loading or bone loading, that's something I want in individuals as they get older, right? Like I want to keep their
Sure.
bones strong, compression fractures,
Yes.
fractures in different areas. They exist and they're very debilitating. So let's, change the exercise mindset from not just making people strong from a muscle standpoint, but let's also load the skeletal structures and make sure that
Yeah.
we have, some longevity there as well. And, like we mentioned, training evolves over time and that's okay, but there are ways to still do the things that you want to do. We might just have to modify it a little bit.
And I find myself doing more like rotational strength exercises. I do some single leg stuff just to, like you said, like most people do not hurt themselves doing a deadlift or doing it. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It happens because people have rough technique and stuff. But like, for the most part, when you hear about people hurting themselves, they like slipped on ice or they were taking a kid out of a car seat or they were like picking up something outside, and teaching your body how to do those things through mimicking those movements in the gym, either through like unilateral stuff or like you said, loading the spine in a super maximal way, like with a yoke walk or something like that. That's more than people are ever going to be able to put on their spine with like a squat. Just figuring out different ways to challenge your body as you get older, I think, and using that in your programming. As you get older with programming, especially if you've been in the game, like, again, you figure out what you need to do versus the busy work. And like you're saying right now, I think you're hitting on some very important things. And the contact with the ground is something I never thought about, but that makes a ton of sense.
Again, like, we can find ways to move forward and progress forward. It just might have to modify or change how we do it a little bit. On that point too, muscular power and the ability to move fast. You brought up rotation, but it's not just the ability to rotate, it's also the ability to move through rotational patterns and other patterns fast and controlled, right? Like, you mentioned some of these different injury mechanisms we see, and a lot of them occur when people are moving fast. And just because you hit
Yeah.
40 doesn't mean you're not going to still move fast, right? Like, there are
Yeah.
times in life where you have to move quick. There's also some crazy stories out there, right? Where, like, people go into fight or flight, and maybe it's like, the 40-year-old mom who is in a car crash and she has to get her baby out of the back seat. Like, people do some crazy feats sometimes. And I think that muscular power and the ability to move fast under control is also a point that needs to be brought up in relation to someone in their 30s or 40s or even 50s, right? Like, it's okay to program, say, box jumps for someone in their like
Sure.
40s. Like, I
Sure.
think it comes back to intention. Like, I'm not doing box jumps for cardio. I'm not going to program 200 box jumps and call it conditioning. It comes
Right.
back to the intention, right? Like, I want to use something that's going to increase power, muscular power, and I'm going to make them move fast in a controlled environment. Do you do similar things with your programming, or what kind of things do you like to incorporate for an overall like power production?
Man, I'm a big believer in explosive stuff. So I will have people, like you said, box jumps, stuff like that. But I also like to play around with different stuff. Like I'll do box jumps, like 3 high box jumps directly into your squat, so that you're producing force. Or you'll do your squat, and there'll be a medicine ball behind you. You'll rack it, turn around, grab the medicine ball, and start doing squat jumps, like maximum effort squat jumps, and then drop the ball. You know what I mean? Trying to produce force when your body doesn't want to produce force, but especially rotationally. I do a lot of like band work and stuff where people have to move literally explosively through that plane. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to move it, But I've always been a huge proponent of throwing, carrying, offset carries, and then trying to combine that with explosive training, not necessarily more dynamic stuff like speed work and stuff like that is always part of my programs. Like there's always jumping, even something as simple as like a swing, like a kettlebell swing, kettlebell snatch, a burpee box jump, a burpee broad jump. A lot of times, a lot of people doing broad jumps. Not everyone's broad jump is the same, but the intention of getting them trying to move explosively, you know what I mean? For my whole programming, the whole time, I never withheld that stuff just because someone got older. It just, the height may have had to change, or the reps may have had to change, or whatever. I've always had pretty much, whether you're a 14-year-old or you're a 50-year-old, you're going to be doing similar things, right? Because it's not like this works and this doesn't work. Like everything works with the right time. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I guess there we go. That's I got
Well,
into the
I
weeds.
mean, to your point, no exercise is inherently good or bad. It just might not be the
Right.
right thing for that person at, one instance. And you brought up, the
Right.
burpee, and the burpee gets a lot of hate. And, my
Yeah.
opinions on the burpee have certainly changed over time. And now I look at it as like a tool in the toolbox, right? Like I can get someone's heart
Sure.
rate up really quick and stress the system really quick with burpees. And, if I'm on a time crunch, that might be what I go to. But, from a performance standpoint, we mentioned before that, just because someone hits 40 doesn't mean they're not an athlete anymore. Well, if you want to feel
Right.
athletic, get good at burpees because they smoke everyone. So if you can do 20 or 30 of them in
They
a
do.
row, that's a huge flex. On top of that, I find a lot of the sports that people get into as they start to get older, they change, but there is still a stress to the system, right? We talked about this recently with Ryan Murphy about hunting, right? Like, say a 40-year-old loves to go hunting. Well, say you're hunting in the Everglades in Florida, right? Sure, you might be on a duck hunt, but what happens if, say, a crocodile turns your way, right? Like your fight or flight system is going to kick on real quick. And we could do things from a
Yeah.
training standpoint, like incorporate the burpee to mimic that demand, right? Like we can put you in a stressed state and then make you perform with something like you mentioned the med ball. Like we could go from burpees right to med ball throw to a target and go from super stress
Sure.
state to performance oriented state. So, I think every exercise is a tool and we just have to learn how to best utilize it for the person in front of us.
And I think using intensity being able to range intensity for people at different levels at different times, like being able to peak things. Like I said, like you can't be intense your whole workout, right? Like it's just not possible. But knowing when to go for something, when not to go for something, I think as you mature, you start to learn, right? But also as you mature, you start to be like, this is stupid. Why why am I going to do a burpee? A burpee is stupid, right? But like, that's not how I see it either. I look at it as like an explosive, like you don't get a bigger range of motion in exercise, right? Like you're getting all the way down the ground and you're getting all the way to standing. Like when you're old, you don't do a whole lot of jumping. You don't do a whole lot of extending. Especially you don't do a whole lot of like sprawling out onto the ground like that. But to your point, like all of those things are very real needs in life. Like someone drops a baby, you're think about how quickly an old person will move when they, you know what I mean? There's just your training needs to make you prepared for your everyday life. And I think the older you get, the less that squat, bench, deadlift does that, because when you're younger, you're doing other things throughout your life that are preparing you. You are moving explosive, you're playing games, doing things. But now you even look at like old people in pickleball, how that's changing. Pickleball is changing the game right now for older people, right? Because it's something they can do that builds their hand-eye coordination, it builds their foot speed, their coordination. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
And picking up something like that along with resistance training, I think would be absolutely terrific for a lot of people.
I completely agree. I love that point. And, I love the point about incorporating sport into the routine as well. And, the last thing I want to bring up real quick before we wrap up, I think it's okay to evolve what I'll call accessories that you use, whether that's in a sport like pickleball or, in your training, right? Like, I grew up and I didn't use a lifting belt, but I use a lifting belt now. And there's other people who use like elbow sleeves or knee sleeves, or, maybe you're going to go out on, the court and play pickleball or something like that. Like some people break out the brace, and it's one of those things, if people feel better with that on and it allows them to do what they want to do, I'm not going to tell them not to, like if it enables someone to get active, I want to empower that, not, discourage that.
I agree. And I'm also a big believer in the placebo. Like people will go through all kinds of pre-lifting routines. So if it works for you, I think you should do it, right? Like if rubbing icy hot all over your body makes you feel better before you lift, rub icy hot over your body. I don't care. I'm not against it, right? There's a lot of things that I use in my training for people that are, I do it in my own game. Like if I have a set of 8, I never have a set of 8. I have 2 sets of 4, or I have 4 sets of 2, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like in my head, I play those games, and I certainly do that in my coaching just to make people believe. It's the same thing as calling someone an athlete, right? Like self-belief and your perception is never reality, for the better or for the worse, but typically perception is always skewed. And if I can make you believe in yourself more than you believe in yourself, or if that elbow sleeve can make you believe in yourself more and it works for you, then I say you use it. You know what I mean?
Completely agree, Brian. As we start to wrap up here, I feel like we covered a ton of great points. Is there anything that we missed or anything else you wanted to bring up today?
I don't really think so. What I would say, one of my sayings that like I have on a shirt and stuff is suffer beautifully. And it's basically like get comfortable with uncomfortable, like those types of things. And I think as we get older, like we're all going to suffer in some sort of way. You know what I mean? Whether it be tearing things and not being able to, whatever the case may be, like you're going to go through some stuff, and like all of us choose how we're going to go through that. And being willing to be exactly where you are at the time. And like I've said many times throughout this podcast about the good old days, like, please realize that these are the good old days. And like, if you have your mom, if you have your dad, like hug them, give them a call. You're not always going to have them. There's going to come a time in your life when you wish that you could have that relationship. Or like your friends, trust me, your friends are not going to be your friends in 10 years, not because they don't want to be your friends, because they have baseball practice and 6 kids and all these things. Like take advantage of the time of life that you're actually at, because it goes away, right? And we're talking about aging. Like your bench press right now is awesome. Love your bench press wherever it is, because 10 years from now, maybe it'll be better, but maybe it won't, right? But like enjoy where you're at that time, because man, it goes fast, right? I'm 43 now, and that's super young. And that's super young to a lot of people, maybe some people watching this. But man, I was 16 yesterday. You know what I mean? And all that time, the average human only lives on the earth for like 30,000 days. Like, that's not that much. Like, you think about $30,000, like you're talking about a car, and you're like, that's how many days I have. Like, I don't want to waste them. And I really, the more that you can go through every single day of your life, being thankful, being grateful, and taking advantage of the beautiful things that are all around you right now, take advantage of them, because they're going to go away.
I love that point to end on, Brian. I love that. I mean, basically celebrate every day, celebrate what your body is capable of doing, and, give thanks for all those around you, because to your point, you never know when things could change. So I think that's a great point. Brian, I know you do a lot of coaching for people, and I know you actually just have a program recently that you dropped for someone, around your own age range that way. Where can people find you at, and what kind of programs do you offer?
I offer all types of programs. I think I have like 30 different programs now. But the one that I just dropped is called 45 Master Sessions, and that is for people who either are getting a little bit older, right? Or they just have a lot of miles under the barbell, and they're kind of like, hey man, I need to kind of take a step back, like we talked about. Still super challenging. All of my programs are stupid challenging, like ridiculously hard type of challenging. So they're not for the faint of heart whatsoever. If you're like, and just like, oh, I just want to go in and kind of mess around and stuff, my programs are not for you. Like, they're definitely made to make people better, and they push you whatever. And I think the thing that sets my programs apart from other people's is that I get creative with like time, different frequencies, different stuff like that, so that it's never boring. It's always kind of something different. But people, if they are interested in checking out, you can check me out with my name, Brian Alsruhe, on YouTube. And I give out all the programs that I sell. I sell all my programs for $25, but I also have videos of explaining exactly what they are, how to set it up yourself, everything for free on my channel. So if you don't want to spend money on a program, but you want an idea of what I do, you can get it online for free. But if you did want to buy something, it is at Neversate, NEVERSATE, like never satiated, neversate.com.
Awesome. We will link to that in the description below. Your website, your YouTube channel, your Instagram handle, all of that below. So if you didn't quite catch that, you can just check those out there and see everything that Brian is doing. Brian, this is a great conversation today. I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
I appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to share it with a friend, subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, and leave a review. This way we can spread knowledge and motivation and help reach more people. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.